Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize for my absence, but I'm in the middle of buying a house, and the process is time-consuming. On the plus side, I should soon have more time to participate in this hobby of mine. Before we get too far ahead, let's go over the usual. First, the opinions in this review are my own. I encourage everyone to pick up a copy of the books I'm reviewing today and form your own opinions. Second, if you enjoy what I do, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to my channel and my reviews. I review indies as well as traditionally published books, and reviews like these may help these books find their audience. Third, if you'd like to look at my own work or review it, you can find a link in the description. I welcome all comments and criticism, because if I'm going to dish it out, I have to be able to take it. And fourth, I'm running a promotional art contest soon. The prizes are currently 3 $200 commissions. While the official rules aren't completely ironed out yet, you can find out more details in the video in the description on YouTube and Rumble, or pinned to my page on Twitter. Keep an eye out for the official rules in the next week or two. With that out of the way, let's begin. This review is going to be different. James Harriot is one of my favorite authors and a big reason I enjoy reading today. I haven't picked up one of his books since I myself was published and started reviewing books. I think now's a good time, since I don't want an Indy to take the algorithm hit, to go over some of my favorite authors and show you that no book is perfect. So let's go over my dislikes, likes, and thoughts on his first 2 books. But before that, a bit about the story. James Harriot was a veterinary surgeon who worked in a country practice in the Yorkshire Dales in the north of England in the 1930s. The story is semi-autobiographical. There's not a solid timeline, as the books are more a collection of short stories than an actual novel. But there's a sense of an overarching story. His first 2 books cover his practice before World War II. Much of the stories involve his interactions with the local farmers, his eccentric boss Siegfried, their troublesome student-in-residence Tristan, and occasionally his wife Helen. Most stories focus on the troubles he has as a vet in the 1930s, as medicine and the attitudes towards it were changing. There's an overall Pollyanna feel with the miracle of life taking center stage, but there are plenty of heartbreaking tales about the animals and people he couldn't save. If you read past the first 2 books, you'll reach his stories about the war and his trip to the Soviet Union. But I'm going to focus on his earlier work, because that's what I was able to listen to in the last few weeks without worry of getting lost. It really didn't feel free to try to give the fractured time between work and travel to any other book. Usually with indies or anything that's brand new to me, I'd like to be able to sit and focus on it. If I had to break down the story, it covers him coming to the town of Derby as a freshly graduated student, single, naive, and ready to prove himself, and his time spent gaining the locals' trusts, getting used to the attitudes of the farmers, and courting and marrying his wife. There's a few other continuing threads, but I'll cover them later. So let's move to my dislikes. First off, there are several stories that are just too emotional. They're either too soft or play up the sad side too much to be enjoyable. Usually these involve an elderly person dying, a new farmer going bankrupt, or something else stereotypically sad. Mr. Harriot has a bad habit of emphasizing the farmer's loss to the nth degree. Even when the farmers take the loss in stride, our narrator is a bit too dramatic. And that mostly works, but sometimes it's a little cloying. There's also an abundance of archaic medical jargon. This isn't too bad, and even acceptable given the subject, but it can start on a tangent that pulls you from the story. I can only name a few examples of this in the first 2 books, but it's present enough that it distracted me. Last on my dislikes, James is kind of a weenie. He's timid, constantly second-guessing himself, and easily overrun. Some of this probably has more to do with the British tendency for understatement and the style of writing at the time. These are also a kind of memoir, and no one will be as down on you as you are. James's lack of force aside, there are several other characters that feel incredibly bold, but this too may have more to do with the author's admiration than who they actually were. You have to allow for some fudging of what actually happened, since this is only semi-autobiographical. A lot of this feels like it may have been edited to make the story more appealing. So let's move on to my likes. First, the character work. It is no understatement to say that Siegfried Farnen is one of my favorite characters of all times. He's bold, intelligent, oblivious, and could embarrass an American politician with his memory for promises. Part of his character's fun is watching his forgetfulness and hypocrisy coming back to bite him. At the beginning of a chapter, he'll make a soaring speech about a problem he's noticed. This is how things are, and if everyone would just follow along, everything would be beer and roses. Later in the chapter, after some humbling, he'll reverse course with the subtlety of a fireworks display. People need to be more cautious. I'm always saying we're too quick to act. And so on. Siegfried is a good foil to the main character. He's everything that James wants to be, but fails in things that James, who is more reserved, has little problem in avoiding. This isn't to call him comic relief. Siegfried is a source of inspiration and frustration for James. He's a very accomplished vet with a passion for horses, but he's a brick wall when it comes to his own faults. In other words, he's human. In fact, there are several chapters in which Siegfried will condemn James for something that he did, only to immediately do those things later in the chapter, or to simply reverse and say that James is the complete opposite of what he accused him of earlier. Let's move on and spend some time on Tristan, the student in residence. Tristan is Siegfried's little brother, and is in some ways following in his footsteps. But where Siegfried is a constant source of energy and ambition and storms through the countryside like a whirlwind of medicine, Tristan is the confident, comfortable sort. You're more likely to find him lounging in a chair smoking one of his cigarettes. He devotes most of his considerable intelligence to getting out of work, playing his brother against himself, or pranking and charming the locals. It is actually stated in the book that he treats the local nursing school as a source of constant female company. He and Siegfried fight as only brothers can, but there's a spark of respect between the two. This doesn't prevent Siegfried from sacking his brother every other week, declaring to the heavens that, "This time you've done it! You're out! You're done!" Only to completely forget about the declaration by morning, and the two are sitting at the breakfast table once again. These are far from the only noticeable characters. Each chapter introduces us to new people, each with flaws and positives. Most only stick around for a chapter or two. Others are a recurring theme all to themselves. I'd like to spend some time expounding on Granville Beckett, the larger-than-life animal practitioner, but that's an experience best left for the reading. While the stories feel episodic, there's an overarching story, that being of James's home life with his wife and their courtship. I met most of these chapters with a groan, but they do give the books a sense of time, despite their tendency to jump around. The flow of time is helped along by other recurring characters or by the decisions of Siegfried to fix a problem he's noticed. These problems ultimately stem from Siegfried himself, and so the fixes tend to do little more than annoy the practice owner. The last thing in my likes is the stories themselves. I said in my dislikes that some of them are a bit too emotional, and I stand by that. But there's no denying the bulk of the stories are good. They leave me in a good mood, happy to just enjoy my small snippets of free time, and enjoy the greenery around me. There's no world-ending stakes, no great villain, just a country vet doing his best for the animals of his rural community and the colorful people who own them. So let's move on to my thoughts. Why is this one of my favorite book series? There's no denying that most of the books I review are science fiction, fantasy, or some mix of the two. Grand settings and high stakes can make for an exciting story, but it's nice to enjoy something practical. Stories that present something of the everyday. Mr. Harriot's world often feels so far from our own. Rather than the personalities we see on TV, YouTube, or the news, the characters in his story are all people he actually meets and knows. The most important being people within his community. Everything feels simpler, yet more complicated. It's fun to look at how life used to be, a glimpse of where we came from. We spend a lot of time on the epic lore of our favorite series, ancient timelines that go back thousands of years, epic wars between disparate factions determining the future of everyone. We often forget we have our own history and our own lore, and how much of it is built on the small scale. People and their lives have always fascinated me in a distant way. I've never been a fan of being too close, but the mechanics of it all is very interesting to me. Thousands of people, all interconnected and all independent. It's simple, yet complex, and reminds me that not everything has to be world-ending to keep your attention. So why spend time reviewing these old books? James Harriot doesn't need my review. He's been dead for decades. His books were made into a show, and I'm pretty sure his surgery doesn't exist anymore. Well, that's just it. Aside from the town of Darrowby, which the stories are centered around, and his descendants, there's not much left of the author, except his stories. Most of the people who watch my channel are authors, writers, or one day hope to be. We all wish to do what Mr. Harriot has done. While writing changes over time and genres rise and fall, we all want to tell a good story. Something that, even as the details fade, stick with you. And with that said, I wish you all good luck.